Welcome to this week's edition of the MBN Iran podcast. We're in the middle of June, and there's really only one topic on everyone's minds when it comes to Iran, and that is the Memorandum of Understanding that we understand is going to be signed on Friday. There's lots to talk about. Apparently, there's a text that's been released, and with me today is Henry Sokolski, the founder and executive director of the Nonproliferation Policy Education Center. And if there's one person we'd want to talk to this week, it is you, Henry. You've talked to people at MBN before, and you are an expert in this field. Let me get your initial quick take on the whole thing before we dive into nuclear. What's your take on what you've read, heard, seen so far about this MOU?
Well, it can't be a memorandum of understanding. It might be better framed as a memorandum of misunderstanding. And the reason why is the Iranians have immediately announced that, well, this is inaccurate. And the administration in Washington says, well, it doesn't really reflect all the side deals. So everyone's focused on this image, kind of like in Plato's Republic on the cave wall, thinking it's reality. I don't think we know what we've got here. My guess is, at best, it might be an accurate description of a raffle ticket on a raffle ticket. But there, you do see in some of the language what's unclear, at least. I mean, maybe that's the best way to understand it, is that it's a Michelin guide on what's not clear yet.
There's lots to probe on that one. You've looked at the apparent 14 points because it's still not been concerned. If you look at in the large context, the non-nuclear parts of it, and again, lack of clarity, as you said, but what's your general sense of what's going on here and what's happened after something like 105 days of war, 108?
Well, I think I'm going to be absolutely conventional and not say anything new, but they say if something sounds right, you might say it frequently, so I'll pitch in, pile on. I think the conventional wisdom is that, on the one hand, the administration has taken a unique approach to its concern about things relating to nuclear weapons. What's unique? Well, they bombed the facilities in a country twice. No other administration has ever done that. Right? So that's not part of the agreement, but that is the leverage that produced whatever this is. What's not clear to me is whether or not that leverage with this agreement is likely ever to be used again. It seems unlikely to me, but last I checked, I'm not in the White House, that the probability of the United States bombing Iran's nuclear facilities again before November's election seems pretty slim now. I mean, it was at least conceivable before, but with this agreement, that particular lever, I think, has left the building.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question about who has the leverage overall in all of this, right? I mean, we have the choke point of the Strait of Hormuz, and
there are lots of upset parties. The Israelis are upset because they want to continue the war. The supporters of Israel in the United States are upset because they want to support what Israel wants. The hawks are upset because they keep saying, well, we need to finish the job. I think they want to flatten all of Iran. I mean, some of their enthusiasms are really unchecked. And then, of course, the people who criticize the war say, well, we didn't get very much and we would have been better off without the war. And the Obama deal would have been better. You shouldn't have, given it up. So lots of critics, and they're all making somewhat complementary noises to one another. But the fact of the matter is, I don't see the administration being able to use, as they describe it, the hammer very much before the election, if at all. And I think what they look like they're doing, according to the critics, is settling and trying to get, as I say, a raffle ticket on a raffle ticket. Let's stop and see what we can do without bombing and hope that we can get the oil going, maybe do something about inflation, the things that bear on the November election. I mean, that's the conventional cut on that, and I'm not sure it's wrong. I say that even though I'm usually a critic of conventional wisdom when it comes to things that are nuclear, and there is a problem with the conventional wisdom there, and we can get into that if you'd like.
Absolutely. Well, let's focus on the nuclear issue. Obviously, a big topic for you, whether there's an MOU or not. A lot of what they're talking about is premised on inspections. And I know you have very strong opinions about access and timing and so on when it comes to inspections. How realistic is it? Again, based on the rather vague wording that we've seen so far, but what's your gut reaction to that notion?
I think we've lost the plot by thinking that's a way to address the concern that they might make a bomb. Why? Well, how did we get here? We got here because we more or less turned our other cheek and said, well, we don't want you to make nuclear fuel, but we'll let you do it under inspections. Now, the problem there has to do with basic, I wouldn't say physics, but just common sense. When you make nuclear fuel, you're pushing around liquids, gases.
A big concept in all of this is the notion of inspections. They've been mentioned by Vice President Vance. It's going to be, again, as in the past, one of the premises of how the US and Iran go forward with Iran's nuclear program. You have in the past expressed skepticism about the notion of inspections, how they can happen, the timing and the access. So, what do you think this looks like now? Again, bearing in mind that the agreement is rather vague, but they've obviously made a reference to inspections.
I think what I see so far being articulated not only by the administration, but even by its critics, seems a bit misguided. Inspections work pretty well if you're looking at something that isn't very close to being a bomb, and that is so large and so solid and stable in its state that you can actually count it, and it won't move on you or disappear. Well, what am I getting at? How did we get into this mess with Iran? It's because we allowed them at one point, you could argue the Obama administration, to make nuclear fuel. And nuclear fuel making involves moving around gases, liquids, and powders. Now, you cannot really keep a good track of that. In fact, the best you can do will still mean that a certain percentage of it you'll never really know whether you accounted for it or not. There's just a margin of error of 1 to 5%, depending on who you listen to. Well, the amounts of material that 1 or several percent constitutes when you're moving massive tons of material through, could make a couple of bombs in a heartbeat. So inspecting something like nuclear fuel making is oxymoronic, I think. On the other hand, there's something they're not talking about at all. What if I was to tell you that instead of 10 or 11 bombs worth of gas in canisters underneath rubble, which is the hexafluoride, uranium hexafluoride that everyone's talking about, that's 60% enriched, there's more than 200 bombs worth of plutonium sitting in spent fuel rods in a cooling pond at Bushehr, which is a power reactor facility.
So this isn't really going to solve that, is it? I mean, that's
well,
what you're
they haven't
saying.
even talked about that. Now, I am optimistic, and I
Yeah.
have reached out to people on the Hill and in the administration to say, well, I don't know what you can do with the Iranians. You may never reach an agreement, but we should be very clear now about what's necessary to achieve the president's goal, which is to eliminate the possibility of them making nuclear weapons, not only now, but in the future. And he's very clear about that, and that's a worthy goal. But to achieve it,
And that's one of the
you want
stated
to.
aims of the whole war,
Yes, yes.
right? I
Well,
mean,
absolutely. So if that's what your aim is, then you need to be clear in your ask, and that it's okay to focus on the uranium. You can make bombs out of that, and it's a concern. And yes, you want to probably make sure they can't make enriched uranium, and that they can't stockpile it from their production. Now, the Iranians are telling us point blank, forget it. We're going to retain our ability to make it, and we're going to retain all of our enriched uranium. So, it's not clear we can get an agreement, but at least we've
well,
joined the issue. Okay, that is a legitimate issue. But for some reason, we do not want to join the other legitimate issue, which is the 200 plus bombs worth of plutonium sitting in the spent fuel pond at the power reactor at Bushehr. I have not heard anyone utter anything about that, which is just astonishing to me.
so this two-stage process, I mean, let's walk our way through this apparent MOU. So 60 days, sanctions relief, assets unfrozen to a certain extent. So what's the incentive from the Iranian side that's different from before to basically concede on the issues that you've raised?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, I think, depending on what your political outlook is, you have sharp views. But I think the beauty of this is it may not be clear, but it's and that may cause people not to want to make judgments, but it keeps everybody watching. So we'll have to watch, and then we can comment while we watch. But we'll see. The critics obviously on the left and right say, "Oh, well, you've blown all your leverage and you're not going to get anything." Well, we'll find out. We'll find out.
What's the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario for what happens after 60 days?
Well, I think there are two things that we worry about. First, we worry about Iran. I don't know if there's a deal for sure, and it could be that we just get played or tapped along, as they say, and that wouldn't be unusual. The Iranians are very skilled. By the way, they refer to this deal as a major victory for them. So
Absolutely.
and you can read various commentators that say, well, it may have a point, and so you can go that way. I think the second concern, though, is one no one is talking about. What about what we're saying and what kind of model it sets for the other neighbors who are going to get nuclear power or have it to follow? I mean,
You anticipated my next question, and I'm going to ask you, how do you feel about I think I know how you feel, Henry, the US-Saudi cooperation agreement, and how does that play into what should the US do now with that? Should it kind of put it on hold right now?
Well, you can tell it's been on hold, but I don't know how long you can hold it on hold. It's been signed. It's sitting in the president's inbox. I think the problem isn't just Saudi Arabia, though. It's the UAE. It's Turkey. It's Egypt. It's anywhere else we're going to send something like a reactor that will produce weapons usable materials. I mean, there's a reason the International Atomic Energy Agency inspects reactors. It's because they produce weapons material that can be chemically stripped out. There's a bit of a process here, but it's a bomb starter kit. Now, the problem here is something that we have not yet addressed publicly, and I suspect, I fear that we may not. And that is something that went unattended in the 2015 Obama nuclear deal with Iran, and that was Bushehr and power reactors. We did not ask for what's called near real-time surveillance of the spent fuel or the reactor. Now, what's near real-time surveillance? It's when a camera takes pictures once every 5 or 10 minutes. Well, why would you need or want that? As it currently works, every 90 days, someone goes and takes the camera box and opens it up and sees what the camera took pictures of for the last 90 days. The problem is the lights can go off during that 90-day period, or a crane could be placed in front of the camera lens, and you don't see anything, and you only learn about it 90 days after maybe the lights went out. Well, why does that matter? Well, you can take a fuel rod out of the spent fuel pond in a matter of hours and put a dummy in, and no one would be the wiser. So near real-time surveillance is voluntary, but 30 some odd countries actually allow it. And even Iran allowed it for Natanz. But when asked after the deal was cut, which did not include it in 2015, the IEA demanded that the Iranians come around and allow near real-time surveillance for Bushehr. Guess what? They said no. Now, I think we need to insist on this. And not only do we need to insist on it because we hope they would say yes, but even if they say no, we should insist on it because we ought to be asking the UAE to do this. And certainly in any deal we do with Iran, we should be asking for this. I don't hear it yet. Not only that, but the Russians, when they sold the plant to the Iranians, offered to take the spent fuel back to Russia. Well, they didn't do it. They didn't do it because the Iranians said, oh, well, you got to pay us an extra fee because we think there's fuel value in the spent fuel, which is kind of insane. The reason why is that the fuel value is there, but it costs so much money to get it out, it's negative. But they insisted on that, and the Russians said, well, okay, we'll just leave it there. Well, there's now more than 200 bombs worth of plutonium, some of it quite accessible because it's cool, it's not particularly hot, and some of it near weapons grade, it's fuel grade. So, I don't know. It seems to me...
Let me mention another country, right, that's in the region and has a different interest in all of this, which is Israel. So great, the US and Iran have agreed. The main party that is worried about this, that's nearby and certainly easily within reach, is Israel. And obviously a major factor is how happy they are and how much they trust Iran, trust the regime in Tehran to follow through on any agreement that's been arrived at.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's funny. Some of the articles I've written have gotten more play in Israel than they have here because they are concerned and they're worried. Yep. I mean, I think, the bigger problem, which is long term, of course, is that, well, Israel has bombs. I mean, only a U.S. official can't conjugate that sentence because there are certain rules. We can't admit it if we have clearances. I don't. So, but everyone else knows they do. And in the long run, my guess is you're going to have to address that as well. I mean, when I say long run, this is not part of the Iran deal. But this is a neighborhood with any bad luck, if you let Iran, in principle, continue to make nuclear fuel, which we've sort of kind of suggested we might after a 10-year moratorium, they say. Once you concede that they have some kind of right, which they insist they have, to make nuclear fuel, well, then how do you say no to the Saudis? How do you say no to the UAE, which has an agreement not to make nuclear fuel, but only if their neighbors aren't making it? Well, if Iran and Saudi Arabia are making nuclear fuel, UAE then is off the hook. And then, what about Egypt and Turkey, two countries that we tried to get them to agree not to make nuclear fuel, said, no, we want to have that right. What happens in a Middle East that has everyone getting within, several weeks or several months of a bomb? It can't probably end better than a Middle East without that. So yes. in the long run...
And what about is full dismantlement completely off the table? I don't know, Libya, North Korea, like other countries come to mind. Is this just no longer something that is even realistic?
Well, we've certainly dismantled Libya's program, and I think some countries have given up even nuclear power who, aren't making bombs, like Germany and Italy. This idea of what's possible is a function of what you're concerned about. If you are absolutely wedded to the idea that no matter what the cost, you have to have nuclear power because it doesn't produce carbon, well, then okay, the government and the rate and taxpayers get stuck with a big bill and they do it. But if you're more worried about nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons spreading and possibly being used, yeah, you might say there are other ways to make electricity, most of which are a lot cheaper. We have not come to terms with that. Not yet.
So I want to go big picture for a moment, which is, this, as we've discussed in the past, this nuclear program in Iran started under the Shah. Like, this topic has been on the table one way or another for half a century. And it's still an issue. And you think about the 12-day war, you think about a war that now went on since February 28th, and, sort of hot war and then ceasefire. And it's still an issue. It's still unresolved. Like, what's the problem? Like, Henry, what does your gut tell you? Why are we here today still talking about this, still buying time, 60 days of negotiations and so on? It feels weird sometimes that we're still talking about this. Like, what's missing? What
Well,
is the,
what's
what are
missing?
we not doing?
What's missing is you're dealing with a group of people that want to stay in power and understand, like the North Koreans and Chinese, and you could argue every country that has nuclear weapons, that part of the
Sure.
legitimacy and staying power of the government in place that has nuclear weapons or a nuclear weapons option is to keep it. And
But that's the thing from their end. But then accepting that that is a premise, that they're there, uh, although allegedly there was an attempt to have them not in power, but here we are. But then what's missing on the West side? You just kind of look at it and go, this has been of concern for so long. And I'm about to ask you about JCPOA, because how can I not? Uh, why are we still here?
well, because we're frightened that they might get a bomb, and we've let them get very close, and we've tried to persuade ourselves that if you watch something, that'll prevent that thing from morphing into a weapon, when there are certain things you just can't watch very well and it could turn into a bomb even if you're looking. And I think we've not really doubled down on what can be quote unquote safeguarded, that is, inspected in a way that gives you reliable, early enough warnings of a possible military diversion that you can intervene and prevent it from turning into a bomb. We let it go all the way to letting Iran make nuclear fuel. And I haven't heard, now, the administration and arguably the previous Obama and Biden administrations much more quietly. But this administration said, well, there is no an inalienable right to make nuclear fuel. But then they say, well, there may be conditional rights. I think that's too clever by half. I think you just have to say, you can't let countries get into nuclear weapons, Freudian slip, nuclear fuel making, unless you absolutely are convinced that they're going to be your friend forever. Now, anybody who thinks anybody in the Middle East is going to be their friend forever doesn't read history.
Yeah. So speaking of history, JCPOA compared to this, obviously it's apples and oranges. For one thing, this obviously, there's just a few lines, a few sentences in the MOU that we've seen. But what is your gut telling you about where this is versus JCPOA was in terms of achieving the West's aims?
I think people exaggerate what we got with the JCPOA. A friend of mine who's in favor of it, by the way, says, well, if you believe they'll never want to get nuclear weapons, the deal is helpful because it creates some political barriers to changing your mind. But if you think that they're dead set on getting nuclear weapons, the technical barriers in that agreement are pretty wane, to say being diplomatic. Not really very serious. And the reason why, again, is first, you could even in an inspected facility probably siphon material away incrementally or slowly and not be caught. or abruptly, and then you just tell people to leave. And then there's this problem of, well, what you can't see, which is, well, do they have covert facilities that we're not inspecting? All of this suggests that once you get into fuel making, you're over a barrel, and not to admit it, I think, was the big mistake of the JCPOA. Now, we could repeat that error, although, oh, well, we'll have 10 or 15 years of moratorium if the Iranians agree, and they might. But then you're right back on the same horse that, got you into trouble the last time. Once they start making it again, well, they're within weeks or months of getting the material needed to put into a bomb core, and then you haven't accomplished as much as you thought. I think so that's similar. Well, of course, the difference again is what I mentioned from the outset. This is the only administration that has bombed a country on the basis that we couldn't permit them to get nuclear weapons. So, that's different. We didn't do that under Obama. I'd say the other similarity, unfortunately, between the negotiations so far and the deal is it doesn't address the power reactor plutonium path to bombs, which is non-trivial. I mean, arguably at least an order of magnitude greater than what we're focused on, which is on, the uranium option, which is very important, but is only one possibility. I think more generally, the Obama administration and arguably the Trump administration does not have a very coherent story on how the nuclear power story ends in the Middle East. Is it a peaceful story, or is it one that spreads bomb starter kits? Are these also now going to be targets? I mean, the UAE found itself getting hit by Iranian drones, its nuclear power reactor plant. And we came very close to hitting things in Bushehr. So, is the future that you build these things and they become target sinks? I don't think we have talked about either of those rather negative futures at all. And we didn't do it under Obama, and we're not doing it now. And I think we need to start paying attention because people are actually talking about building more of these things there.
Do you think 60 days is enough time to figure this out?
I may not be, it's certainly enough time to figure it out. The question is whether you can negotiate with skilled Iranian diplomats and get anywhere in 60 days. I mean, there's lots of opinions that they seem to know what they're doing at least as well as we do. And if that's the case, it could take more than 60 days. I think it's just as likely you won't get anywhere even if you had 160 days. It's not clear to me that there's the ingredients for a deal that is going to be very good. And the reason why is their opening position is we have to hold on to all the uranium. We might blend some of it down. We've got to be able to have the right recognized to make nuclear fuel. So we might agree not to make it for a certain period of time, but then you've got to allow us. And our position, I got to believe, if we're serious about preventing them from getting bombs, has got to be much harder nosed than that. And I don't know how you make the two positions meet. And I suppose, I always was impressed by lawyers when I worked in the government who always said, oh, well, you just cut the baby in half. Well, last I checked, when you do that, the baby dies. And so I think, some of the things that I'm talking about are stubborn facts that we're not really publicly discussing enough.
Does your gut tell you on a scale of sort of 0 to 10, 10 being they've never been honest and forthcoming and they are fully and actively developing a nuclear weapons program, 0 being, it's they're trying to get as close as they can. If you take a scale like that, where would you put where you think they are?
Well, there's two questions there. One is intent and the other is capability. And everyone's trying to clarify for everyone else what they think the capability is, which is open for lots of discussion, because I don't think we know. Some people say, well, it's been obliterated, and we don't have to worry about the Bushehr problem and the plutonium problem. Other people say, well, we don't know what we don't know, and they may have this and they may have this hidden there and here. And yeah, we do have to worry about the plutonium option. So I think that one's hopeless. And having been in government and having had very high clearances, it doesn't get better with being cleared. These things, by their very nature, open themselves up to uncertainty. Now, the intent part, now that I think we know. They haven't changed one whit. And now that's the bad news. You want some good news? I'll give you a little. People like me have been running around for, 30 years saying, well, they're very close to getting a bomb. They're very close to getting a bomb. It's been 30 years. They didn't do it. I think we need to think about, well, why didn't they do it, and what that's all about? Because you might want to start strengthening their incentives to continue to behave that way.
Which is what? Why do you think?
Well, I think there are some political downsides to actually going for the bomb, domestically and internationally, that I think they're aware of. We need to strengthen those disincentives and study them a bit. I had a young man who I mentored who wrote a book on the gateway to the bomb. You can find it on the website of my modest nonprofit. And he tried to struggle with this for, not only Iran, but a lot of other countries in the Middle East. I don't know that you want to rely on these speculations, but you want to think about that too. I think ultimately people who complain that you need to change the regime have a point. That might help. Maybe, take a look at what happened in South Africa. The management changed. They opened everything up. We don't think that they're getting a bomb now. They had a bomb. They got rid of it. Change in management may mean a lot. Do we have a plan long-term, like we did with, combating the Soviet Union, to get people to not want to have that government running them? I don't know how good this is. I mean, I suppose this program is part of a way of at least reaching people in the region and talking about these things. But that's just a small step of a very larger ladder that you'd have to have if you were serious about appealing to the people in Iran to enable themselves to part their ways with the government. I don't know how realistic that is, but
well, it's interesting because you mentioned South Africa, and it's a very good point. At the same time, approximately, Ukraine, which for different reasons had Soviet, nuclear weapon capabilities left over from the Soviet Union, they gave them up. And they probably regret that now. I'm sure there are days when they kind of wish they had that leverage. But I think you're right. That's one of the things, is that people would prefer to have a nuclear weapon for just in case to not having one.
Well, do they? I mean, in other words, I don't think people love being glib about these topics. But you can see examples where folks have said, no, we don't want it. And I think, again, that has something to do with the change in government to something more akin to self-government. I mean, self-governing operations frequently make the choice of dispensing with these things. Countries that want to modernize, even Gaddafi, for God's sakes, made a decision to drop his bomb project. So I think we lack imagination here, and we've resigned ourselves to be lazy about this. I think that's a mistake. There are certainly many people who know much more about the Middle East than I ever will, and a lot more about Iran, who view this deal as consolidating and recognizing and making legitimate the people now in power in Iran. Now, if they're right, the takeaway is there'll be many, many more years of nuclear misunderstandings, negotiations, and possibly shooting again. If these critics are right, we may be in a long shadow war that may go hot and cold for quite a while.
Well, on that note, if there's one person that I know we can always come to give us the real deal and also provide a sense of hope, it's you, Henry. So, Henry Sokolski, I want to thank you for your time, and considering what's on the table and the next 60 days and longer than that, we'll be back again asking you for more of your insights on this. Thank you, Henry.
Well, thank you for having me. It was enjoyable, to say the least.